Hello, and welcome to Thinking Boldly. This is the podcast series of the Concilium Institute. I am retired Judge Julie Field, and I am here with my colleague and the co-founder of the Concilium Institute, Heidi Webb. We are very excited to have a conversation this afternoon with Maureen McBrien. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us. We can't wait to hear about what you have to say about the mystery of how to get divorced.
Thank you for having me on this fantastic podcast. I look forward to the chatting.
I can't wait. Maureen, as people need to know about you and who you are and what you do, and your expertise around helping people through this mystery. Maureen McBrien is a partner at Brick Jones, McBrien and Hickey LLP, which is a family law firm in Needham, Massachusetts. Maureen focuses her practice on all aspects of family law and prides herself in being a strong and reasonable advocate who can move a case forward in whatever fashion is appropriate, depending on the facts and circumstances of the case. She is an advocate of private arbitration of family law disputes for the efficiency, privacy, and convenience of all involved. And I think we'll want to talk more about that and what that means and what it is. Maureen also enjoys writing and speaking engagements and handles family law appeals. Maureen, in her spare time, how do you have any? I don't understand, that she is a co-author of the American Bar Association's book entitled Assistive Reproductive Technology, A Lawyer's Guide to Emerging Law and Science, and acts as a consultant on family law-related issues that arise from the use of assisted reproductive technology. Maureen is the co-author of Thomson Reuters' fourth edition of Massachusetts Practice on Family Law and Practice, and she was the ABA's Family Law Section's publication board member for 7 years and is also a member of the Family Law Section Council and currently serves as vice president of the section. She's a graduate of Gettysburg College, where she was the captain of her soccer team, and is also a graduate of Suffolk Law School. And Maureen, really to no surprise, based on all the credentials that I just read, has been nominated as a super lawyer each and every year since 2015 and was named Top Women in Law in 2020 by the Massachusetts Lawyers Weekly. So Maureen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and helping us unlock the mystery of how to get divorced. So maybe we could start there. I mean, I think sometimes people just don't even know what they know they want to get divorced, but they don't know what it means. They don't know what they want. How do you help them unlock that mystery?
Yeah, thank you. It's such an interesting question. I've probably met with 1,000 potential new clients at this point in my career, and they all come in, and there is a common thread there. Some of them know they want to get divorced. Others are kind of left behind and don't really want that, but they're all kind of wondering how, like, what's next? And, the conversation proceeds by, usually I'm asked, well, do we need to get a mediator? Do I need to file? Can we work it out outside of the divorce? Do we both need to get lawyers? Can we use the same lawyer? So I find myself in the beginning answering lots of questions just about process. So I always tell people, well, look, let me learn a little bit about your case and your situation, and then we can talk about the best path forward. And that, I think, is different for a lot of people. For example, some people aren't anxious to proceed at all. So maybe I say, look, why don't you let your spouse hire someone and then we'll come along. Maybe we can chat about what that might look like and what you'll have to do and when. But if you're not anxious to move the process, maybe the strategy is let's hold off a little bit. Why don't you try marriage counseling? Sometimes I meet with people and I tell them at the end of the conversation, I'm not sure this marriage is over. So why don't you go to therapy or try something different? And maybe I don't hear from them for a while, if at all, again. Sometimes the situation will be dire and urgent. Someone comes in, I don't have access to money. I don't have access to my children. Well, in that case, I'm going to say, look, we need to file right away and try to get in front of a judge. But usually it's somewhere in between those two, right? Like you're coming up with a strategy of do we try to work the entire thing outside of court and then file what we call in Massachusetts a joint petition for divorce, which I understand is called different things in different states, meaning an uncontested divorce? Or does someone file and someone's the plaintiff and the other person's the defendant? A lot of people think that's can send the wrong message to a spouse if I file and I'm the plaintiff and he's the defendant or she's the defendant, and are concerned about the message that might convey. So we try to be thoughtful about, depending on the case, which avenue we take. I also then get questions, well, do we have to go to mediation? And, that depends on the lawyer. Some lawyers are mediators, some aren't. With respect to kind of how I approach it, usually I say to them, look, I'll be your lawyer. Your spouse should get a lawyer, and we'll try to work it out after we do all the disclosures, and get all the information we need. We'll try to work it out. In the event we get stuck on something, such as the value of a business or the appropriate level of support or the treatment of a particular asset in the case, maybe we can hire a retired judge or an attorney mediator to help us navigate that issue. Explain to them that mediation is a non-binding process, that the mediators are neutral, doesn't advocate for either one of the parties. So I always think it's good to have an attorney at your side, or at least in your corner as you go through mediation. I try to convey the benefits and drawbacks of kind of each approach. For example, I always tell people mediation is great if it's the right fit for the right situation. Sometimes if I hear about abuse or power and control dynamics in a relationship, I might steer a client away from that and say, I don't really think that, mediation is appropriate for your situation. It can be with the right mediator. However,
Mhm.
sometimes, if you're going to do this all in the same room, maybe that's not the right situation. Although I think a lot of skilled mediators certainly can help clients who have high conflict situations by
Yeah.
using different sorts of approaches like separate rooms and things like that. So it all depends, I think, when it boils down to it, what is the right approach. But I like to educate clients. So to take some of the mystery out of it, there's not a lot of nexus between the breakdown of a relationship and a decision to get divorced and then the process of divorce itself. It's completely different. And I always marvel at the person I meet initially is so different than the person on the other end of it. And a lot of that has to do with the process you go through to get there. Um, Obviously, we all like to avoid a litigation vortex that some of these divorces end up in. Sometimes it's inevitable, but usually, with two good lawyers, you can try to steer a case towards its conclusion. It's not always a straight line, but hopefully you're both going in the right direction at minimum. And there's definitely things you can do, I think, to help the case along. And that's also kind of when I'm talking to a client, say, well, what needs to be done here? What do we need? Are you aware of the finances? Do you know, is there transparency? If there is,
Right.
then we can short circuit. Maybe we don't need to get 3 years of statements. Maybe we just need to get an appraisal of the house. Maybe, is there any unique assets that we need to value? Is there a pension? So I kind of have a roadmap with a client of what needs to be done. Um, and then they also like to be given, I feel like, tasks, or some of them. Not all of them. And I think knowing who you're dealing with too is helpful. If you have someone who says, I don't have a cell phone, it's going to be different than if you have someone who's in tech for a living. And a lot of that will inform my approach to helping them get moved to the next level in a divorce. I talk also about the financial statement, which I understand is called something different in every state as well. But in Massachusetts, that's a document on pink paper because it's impounded, disclosing all of your income, assets, liabilities, and expenses on a weekly basis, which really people have a hard time wrapping their head around the weekly part,
Right.
and how to compute weekly and how to do it. So at my office, we have an Excel spreadsheet that's PDF fillable. You can do annual, monthly, weekly, daily, however you want to fill in the expense. We'll figure it out and make sure it gets on the financial statement on a weekly basis so we can capture what's coming in and what's going out, what the assets are. So that whole financial statement, I find can be, it's a big part of the process initially in a divorce. And it's a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around because it's a bear of a document and a very telling one, especially once it's complete, once you realize what's happening with the finances, which a lot of people don't really have great knowledge of when they go into the divorce process, especially when you're going to be dividing things in half and then,
Right.
you know, managing two households. So I think all of these types of discussions are important when you're trying to unlock the mystery of how to get divorced.
There were a couple of things you said that I just think were really, I mean, there were many things you said that were interesting, but I just today was speaking with somebody who was asking me very specifically, like, what happens next? Like, and then what? And then what? Like, really wants a very specific roadmap. And I think it's great when people ask those questions because you can have a discussion about, the things you can know and the things maybe you can't know immediately. But I think so many people don't ask because they're either intimidated by the process, anxious, maybe just overwhelmed, or intimidated by even asking those questions. And I think I love that you love educating people because I think that's so much, it's what so many people want, but they don't necessarily ask. And I think it's unusual, really, that lawyers volunteer it because I think for a lot of people, it's sort of like the Wizard of Oz and what's behind the screen. It's sort of like, it's this big mystery between the language and the process, and people just are, feel like they're not entitled to know almost. Um, so that was one um, piece that I thought was particularly interesting. And the other thing I just want to visit back or come back to with you perhaps is when you talked about the difference between a joint petition and a complaint or plaintiff and defendant, which is language, at least in Massachusetts, I think I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about language and what I consider to be unfortunate language, and complaints and plaintiffs and defendants sort of fall into the bucket of unfortunate language when you're trying to restructure a family, which is sort of my preferred language.
This does follow up. Thanks, Heidi. This does follow up with what you immediately spoke with Maureen about, Heidi, which is it sounds like what you do, Maureen, is you meet people where they're at. If you've got someone who's very tech savvy versus someone who's very tech averse, or someone who maybe has better sense of their finances versus someone that doesn't. So how do you suss that out? How do you figure that out when you're meeting someone? What are some of the things that you look for, the clues, the ways that you listen? What what helps you kind of get to that place where you can unlock that mystery for that individual?
That's a great question. I think I never presume anything when I meet someone, and I try to ask really open-ended questions when I first meet with them, which usually just starts out by me saying, I know very little about your situation because usually it's just a brief conversation that my paralegals have with them. And tell me a little bit about your situation. Tell me a little bit about you. Very open ended. That gives them leeway to kind of start wherever they want to start. It's obviously a loaded question given where they are in their lives, but I can get a really good sense, even just after hearing that one answer, where they are because they've given it a little thought, right? They're coming to meet a lawyer. Sometimes they bring financial information. I find a lot of people are surprisingly unaware of their finances, even if they
Yeah.
have remarkably high level educations and jobs. And
Mhm.
people are embarrassed about that. And I always tell them, don't, it's okay. Like people have roles in marriages that wasn't your role. You're saying your spouse did all that. That's fine. It's not to say you're not capable of understanding these things, finding them out. And you're entitled to know everything that's going on, everything you have, and we'll figure it out. So I try to put people at ease about being ashamed a little bit about not knowing things. And it isn't a big deal. we will figure it out. But people seem very nervous about that because divorce is a lot about money, right? And how are we going to divide up the pie?
Right.
And if they come in saying, I don't know, I don't know what my spouse makes. I can't remember this or that. And, it's so overwhelming. A lot of people, have people who know everything down to the cent. And you have people who are very broad thinkers or high level thinkers. Um, the profession of people gives me a tip on
Mm.
what I think they might be like.
Like the engineer versus the
Yeah.
artist.
Versus
Mm.
yeah,
Yes, totally. Or,
not to stereotype,
or the
but
engineer who's married to the artist. I always find those
right,
interesting.
right.
Yes.
Fascinating.
I had one of those cases in mediation the other day, and it was challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I also find the engineers types. I know it's a stereotype, but like it's very divorce is very difficult because it's like a black and white thinker, really, and there's always an answer. And here's the question: tell me the answer? Well, it's not black and white in divorce. There's tons of discretion. And what do you mean? And like, what's support going to be, and why, and where's the calculation, and how come it's not going to be this when the calculator says that? And it's very hard, I think, for some people to process the mystery of divorce
Well, there's also, I
because,
think, you go ahead.
yeah, just because you can't fit anything into a box when you're talking about families.
Right. And
Right.
I think it gets layered with the emotional component, which is if you're a black and white thinker or somebody who likes a spreadsheet or, wants the answer, and then you layer on it not only the ambiguity of the discretion of the law and the court, but also how you might as an individual think something should be, or if you feel like you should be compensated or something was unfair or you were somehow betrayed or challenged in a way that you feel makes you sort of deserving of more than the numbers might show, or that you shouldn't pay on account of someone else's behavior, or, like things that the court and the law might not at all agree with you on the person on, but yet there's sort of a resistance to not to understanding intellectually, but to accepting emotionally that this could be an outcome, even though it doesn't feel right to you or fair to you, or, you know, leaves you feeling less than whole.
That reminds me of the type of client who says, well, let's just go to court and I'm not agreeing to this. My response to that is, okay, we can do that. But then you're ceding total control to a total stranger over what happens
Right.
here. And you're always better. Well, I shouldn't say always. The vast majority of the time, you're better off being the architect of your own settlement and what happens to you in this situation. And when people hear that, it usually resonates. For some people, it don't and won't, and that's why we have judges. And I think the judges know when that case comes before them. But court is an option. We haven't talked about that. That's a whole nother mystery, right?
Yes,
That people
yes,
are
and
like,
arbitration and the difference between them, which I think will be
right.
a fruitful discussion.
Yeah. So, no, court, I always tell people what to expect. You don't have to explain much after you've been there a few times with the same client to the client or the judge. But I always tell them, like, there's two counsel tables. We're going to go up on the one on the right. They're going to go up on the one on the left. You're just going to have to state your name. Where there's two lawyers, you normally don't have to talk unless there's a question of fact that's posed directly to you. If that question is posed to you, answer it. Don't keep talking. There's some sort of decorum in the court. Please dress appropriately. Please behave appropriately. Don't interact with your spouse in a negative manner. I go back to the basics because you don't know what they don't know.
Right.
Arbitration is something I'm interested in keenly as a means to an end in divorces. We don't have a family law arbitration statute in Massachusetts. There is an arbitration statute that's been enacted in various states. I think it's about 9 at this point, a Family Law Arbitration Act. It was pending in Massachusetts and then kind of died. We're going to try to introduce it again. It's been difficult to get traction on it but it would basically provide a forum for couples to get divorced in private settings. So basically, you use a private judge instead of a judge in the courthouse, and you essentially outsource what's happening in the courtroom to a private setting. You would pay the private judge, but all the same rules or less strict rules would apply depending on what everyone's agreed to. And it's quicker and more efficient because you can move the process quicker than you could through the court system. I think we can do it by agreement here in Massachusetts already, but since there's no statute governing the process, I find that people get caught up in what rules govern the process such that it falls apart. Or you have one party not motivated to get the case done and would rather be stuck in the court system than agree to arbitration. But I think, where you can arbitrate other issues
Mhm.
legally, in the employment context, the construction
Right.
context, like, why not have it extend? I think one of the biggest um, drawbacks, I want to call it, to the whole family law system is the delay.
Oh,
And there's nothing
absolutely.
worse to a family who's trying to restructure
Mhm.
than delay, because with time comes changed circumstances. So with the delay, you're solving a situation that used to exist and maybe doesn't exist anymore. And then you end up with a modification. So it's like this chasing your tail type thing. Whereas, and I think what people mostly want is a resolution, even if it's not
Oh, yeah.
perfect.
Yep.
And even, but if they can live with it, I always tell people if you walk away from a divorce feeling not great, but that you can live with it, then it's probably fair. If you walk away thinking you won, something's really wrong because a win in a divorce is half your assets and your kids half the time. So, and if you think you've won in a divorce, it's going to come back to haunt you because someone's going to come back and say, I didn't understand, or I need to modify this, and here's why. Um, so I think arbitration, which is a binding process, so the evidence would be heard in a private setting in a confidential manner, and there would be resolution via binding decision issued by the arbitrator is a really attractive alternative for some cases, especially those that either have a really, well, I guess you could have a public figure who wants a private setting. You could have a, a really interesting legal issue, a really massive estate, a really complex estate, or something that, can't be heard in a efficient manner, especially if a lot of trial days are required in the court setting, which sometimes you get through a few days of trial and then you get another trial date in 7 months, and then
Months.
no one remembers what happened. So I'm definitely an advocate for that process. It's not for everyone. It is binding. Sometimes you waive your rights to appeal.
hmm So two questions about that. Just talking about what it means to be binding versus not binding. And the second thing is, I know that you have founded the Needham Center for Arbitration. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that, given that there, as you said, there's not a specific family law arbitration statute in Massachusetts. How do people come to you and come to arbitration? So really two questions.
Yeah, so I became certified as a family law arbitrator by the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers in 2022. And people have always told me I'd make a great judge. So I figured might as well, but I do want to continue my practice here. So figured I'd put on the private judging hat. Um, we do have the Needham Center for Arbitration, which there's a courtroom in my office here in Needham.
Beautiful
It
courtroom.
mimics the court you would see in public, so it lends like a level of decorum to the process that sitting around a conference room table doesn't really accomplish. So you can have the private judge sitting up at the bench. There's witness tables, there's counsel tables, there's benches for the audience, just as you would expect. We also have the technology, so you can have witnesses testify remotely, cast exhibits remotely, and things like that, which is good for the environment. We have the Needham Center for Arbitration to rent that venue out, not only for arbitration, but for also witness preparation for trials that go on in the court system, which there's been a big use for that. Whenever I have an evidentiary hearing or a trial, I will do a dry run in the courtroom because talk about the mystery of divorce. People don't know what to expect when they're testifying. Most of them have never testified, and it's not a conversation. That's the first thing I say to them. It's not a casual conversation. There's a question before you, then you answer. So it's kind of a robotic way of interacting that many people aren't familiar with, and it's hard to do well. So we also have the courtroom for rent for other reasons, totally unrelated, like having a party. But it's been a great just venue. It's really created a lot of buzz. I hope to get more people in there for arbitrations, and I hope we can have more divorces resolved that way. With respect to the binding nature of it, any decision you get is binding and not subject to further review, except if there's mistakes in there that can be easily fixed. But in general, you have the same process you would in the court system with exhibits and testimony and such. If your divorce case goes to trial, which not many do, by the way, but it is a way to the finish line. You can also do single issue arbitration, which I find can be
Just
helpful.
fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah. So if the one issue in the case is the value of a business, you have two competing business valuation experts. If the one issue in the case is support, or the value of a home, you can do single issue arbitration. So that I think is really something that more people should maybe consider because oftentimes if you put that puzzle piece in place, the rest of the case can settle.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I'm conscious of our time, and I have a question for you. I'm not sure this may be another podcast, um, but it's on the reproductive technology expertise that you sort of have,
Yeah.
how you got into that. I remember long ago having a conversation with you about this, but I think it would be really interesting for people to understand. If you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So my mentor in law school was Charles Kindrigan, who is a professor at Suffolk University Law School, passed away in 2016. But he and I wrote an article on the disposition of cryopreserved embryos in divorce. And I think we were one of the first law review articles on that subject in 2004, and it's published in the Villanova Law Review. And at that time, people were starting to talk about all the cryopreserved embryos in storage, especially in Massachusetts, where we have lots of fertility clinics. I think came up primarily in California, Massachusetts, initially with the number of clinics here. And a lot of people have participated in assisted reproduction that are going through divorce. And it's a question that practitioners should ask their clients. They're not going to volunteer that information. You have to ask them. And the way I ask them, because it's a sensitive, private area of inquiry, I just say, have you ever participated in assisted reproduction? Then you can find out whether they've donated their gametes, whether they've created embryos, what have they done and why? And then are there clinic contracts? You need to take a look at those because sometimes they will have answers, or the clients will have answered questions about what happens in the event of a divorce to their embryos or gametes. So yeah, I've developed a little niche area in that. The Uniform Parentage Act is widely adopted now in many states and does address how donors are treated, whether a child of assisted reproduction is a child of the marriage, and those types of questions that we used to have litigation over. So thankfully, there's been a lot of advances statutorily that now render moot a lot of the cases I was involved in the past, with people arguing that they weren't parents because they're not biologically related to the child because they use donor gametes. All those types of questions have been answered in the manner you we would think they are, and that is
Yeah.
the intended parents are the parents of the child, meaning the two people who put the process in motion, or but for their actions, the embryos wouldn't exist. Those two people are going to be on the hook, so to speak, for
Child support.
parental rights and child
Child
support.
support.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. That was a really great overview. So thank you, because I think that talk about areas of the law that people are, mystified by. This is one. I think sometimes people sign contracts or engage in a process, and they certainly at the time they're doing it, they're not thinking of consequences if a marriage doesn't doesn't survive, or it survives not as long as the embryos might.
So, Maureen, one of the things you said at the beginning of our conversation is that often the people that you meet when they first come into your office are very different. They're very different people at the end. Talk about that evolution and what that looks like and what you've seen.
Yeah, I can't remember who told me this, but they said that criminal law attorneys see bad people at their best and family law people see good people at their worst.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And a lot of people who come to see a divorce lawyer for the first time are destroyed, emotionally. Some have grieved the loss of their marriage and they're completely fine, but a lot of them are not. Um, and I do see people just fighting through that. Each time I meet them, they've made a little progress here or there. Or for some people, divorce can be quite empowering. It's something they've thought about for a long time. And then they realize maybe, I'm going to have access to money. I'm going to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. They educate themselves about things. They get people in their corner, like a financial advisor. Um, they start to accept that things are going to look differently with respect to their time with their kids. That can be a very shocking realization for people
Yeah.
when you say to them, look, you're probably going to have your kids half the time, but I stay at home with them and I raise them. And how can that be? And my spouse has never stepped up like that. What do you mean? Like, it can be a lot of hard realities for people. And on the support side, you're going to have to pay X dollars in support. I can't afford that. How am I going to do that? What am I, so I think you see a lot of acceptance and a lot of moving forward, a lot of empowerment. And I like helping people through difficult situations and seeing them kind of transform or become stronger, I
Yeah.
would say.
I mean, I think, you know, I think to see someone who's really vulnerable, and most people feel pretty vulnerable at the beginning of a divorce, become, empowered, I think is an incredibly gratifying, privilege really to participate in someone's life at that juncture. And yeah, I think you probably are really artful at sort of helping someone get there. And I think that's something that people show you their whole selves at that point. I think because you educate, because you don't judge, because you are sort of asking questions in a non-threatening way about things that are difficult to share, I think it gives you sort of the window into someone's life in a way that I think is really special.
Question for you, Maureen. I wonder if you ever get called out for being someone else.
I do. This happens to me a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me
Do you
about
have
that.
do
Tell
you
us
have do
about
you
it.
have any do you have any guesses?
Um, I do, but I will reserve my guess for and let Heidi go first, since you and I had this conversation offline before we started.
Well, I think Maureen, has it's funny. There's some people who have a warmth about them, and I think they invite comparisons to other people. And there are some people that, they don't. So I think part of it's like an actual, like, oh, your coloring or your hair or like various things. And some of it's like almost a ineffable sort of personality that sort of comes across. And it's like, who is that person? It's like, hmm. So someone that it would be relatable, that I sort of like look at Maureen and I say, I could see her being like Nancy Kerrigan. She's someone I'd want to know. She's someone I could say she'd be fun. She looks athletic. She looks like I don't know, she'd be fun to hang out with.
Yeah, that I get that one, but Judge Field, have you ever gotten Tanya Harding? I just have to ask. We could be a good pair.
Yeah, I mean, you and I, we could play that off each other, right?
What was the name of that
No,
really
I had
terrible film?
I had guessed Ali Sheedy. That was what I saw. But I will also say, as we've been talking, and this is also resonant a little bit with what your favorite movie is, that Catherine O'Hara,
Yes.
right?
Oh, wow. Oh,
I
yes.
see that.
Yes.
I see that with the Irish features. And so your
So,
favorite movie, tell everyone what your favorite movie
yeah, well,
is.
of course, it's Home Alone. I starred in it.
I knew
so
that was you. I knew that
Yeah.
the word of your demise was premature.
Yes, when she passed away recently this year
God.
or last year,
No, this
someone
yeah.
Yeah,
like
it's recently. Yeah.
three people came up to me, and it was right around Home Alone Christmas season, and
Wow,
said to me
wow.
that I look like her when in Home Alone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can see
Yeah.
why. Yeah.
Yeah.
What a
What was
great
her name in the movie? I can't
Catherine.
remember.
Oh. Hmm.
I know she was the mom with the 8
Yeah, she was
kids.
the mom.
Right.
She was great. She was a great character anyway, but in that movie. So why is that your favorite movie? I mean, it's a lot of fun. But who do
It's
you
a lot of
imagine yourself
fun.
being? Her, one of the kids, or one of the mom?
Well,
Yeah.
her now, but maybe Kevin. I don't know.
Yeah.
I grew up in a big Irish Catholic family. I was never left behind, nor have I left one of my kids behind, thankfully. But I don't know. It's just a great movie.
It is a great movie.
I
Really
watch it
funny.
every Christmas with my own kids now. So
That's so
Yeah.
fun. It is. It's just
Yeah.
those movies.
Yeah, no, I think you're really resonant of her, and I think of the care and attention that I know you that I am sure you pay to your own kids, and the love, right? I mean, uh, what parent wouldn't have necessarily lost one in that whole bunch of kids, right?
exactly.
So funny. So funny.
Yeah. So, what's the last word, Maureen? What's the last word for folks that really want to unlock the mystery of the divorce process?
I think ask questions and interview multiple lawyers. Don't be afraid to talk to a couple people. And I always encourage people to do that because you should have a good relationship with your divorce lawyer. It's not like a real estate transaction where you spend 45 minutes with your lawyer, if at all. You're going to have a relationship with this person. It takes a time to get divorced, and you should have all your questions answered, and you should engage in a divorce process that feels right for you and your family. And it's not a one size fits all. So make sure you align with someone who you think will best advocate for you and get you to the finish line in a reasonable way that's not going to further damage everyone involved.
I mean, I think that is 100% true. And I also think it's like an indication of your confidence, just the fact that you would say. And I think some people, want someone to, retain them pretty immediately. It's like, don't, go ask, and make sure that you build the relationship with someone that you want to have throughout this, difficult process. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, Maureen McBrien, thank you so much for taking the time to. I almost said Maureen O'Hara.
O'Brien.
That
That
works.
O'Hara and McBrien.
Yeah, right. So, Maureen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us this afternoon. If people want to find you, if they want to go through either an arbitration process or they want to consider using you and your services to help educate them on how to navigate the mystery of divorce, how can they reach you? What's the best way to reach you?
Sure. So our website is www.brickjones.com, exactly like it sounds, BRICKJONES.com. There's a lot of good information on that website in addition to all of our contact information. Our law firm's in Needham, Massachusetts, and my email address is mmcbrien@brickjones.com. So just MMCBRIEN at brickjones.com. Those are probably the easiest ways to get in touch with me. But thank you so much, Judge Field and Heidi. This has been really fun, and I hope you have me back.
I would
Oh,
love to have you back.
I think we will. Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
All
Thank you
right.
again, Maureen. Delightful to see you as
Thank you.
always. Take care.
All right. Thank you.